because I was definitely on my way out. In fact, I saw a picture in my mind of myself leaving. My legs had been run over and crushed, and I knew it. And so I'm in this wheelchair, and I'm meeting with patients, and I hear a voice saying, "You can still make a contribution." And when I heard that voice, I started to choke up with tears, and I sort of pulled myself back. And then I opened up my eyes and I said to the group that was standing above me as I was laying there on the road, I said, "Get a helicopter fast. I've got to get out of here."
Welcome to the Culture Club, conversations on gym culture and the future of physical fitness. Welcome, Richard. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and our relationship goes back a couple of years when we were working together on your radio program, MindBody, Health and Politics, which was an excellent show. It featured people from all disciplines, but with a focus on kind of the psychological components of physical fitness, and your background in psychology played into that, but also bringing in the politics. And I think that the Culture Club, we're exploring things like successful examples of physical culture, and culture writ large is basically the political arena. So there's a lot that I've wanted to talk to you about in relation to this project. And for starters, I just want to introduce our listeners to a little bit about you. You've been practicing clinical psychology for how many years?
Over 50 years.
And you have an interesting story that would take, hours, if not days to recount, but there are a few highlights that I think are particularly relevant to the conversation today, in terms of sort of overcoming adversity and challenges. Obviously, when you're working with anyone, it helps to be able to relate a little bit to some of their challenges. And I'm thinking in particular of an accident that you had. Can you tell the story of the infamous Winnebago incident and how that sort of affected your journey and how you think about health?
I was with a patient this week, Charlie, who suffers from lifelong emotional aberrations and difficulties. He has trouble sustaining his emotional state, and he has trouble maintaining his cognitive state. His thoughts can be repetitive, they can be annoying, they are intrusive. He certainly doesn't feel like he has control over them, and the same with his feelings. And it's quite severe. He can be, for example, go into a restaurant and go to the bathroom and start thinking about something in the bathroom, and 45 minutes will go by and he's still there, to the point where maybe the owners might send somebody in because they're concerned because the man's been gone so long. Or he might get thinking in his automobile while parked and stay there for 2 hours, completely losing sight of the fact that he went to the store to buy something. And these are just a couple of examples. There are many that are even more severe. And so he feels very often that he's in psychic pain, which then affects his physical body because it's all connected. So he feels psychophysical pain. And I pointed out to him how I am in the same boat with him, because I have severe chronic physical pain, which then affects my psyche. And my physical pain comes from that incident that you referenced regarding the Winnebago, which was, I was riding along with a group of lovely people on a Sunday morning for a motorcycle ride along the Pacific. And I came around a descending radius right-hand turn, and a Winnebago came at me on my side of the road and hit me head on and ran over me and crushed both of my legs. And so I've had the sequelae of that trauma 25 years, is now 30 years later, are still with me every day, in various kinds of sensations ranging from quite unpleasant to just somewhat unpleasant.
And the doctors told you it was not a great prognosis, right? What was their assessment of your abilities from that point
Well,
forward?
I think to begin with, I should mention that the way I saved my life from the impact, which brings on shock, which can often stop the system, is with yoga breathing techniques that I had been practicing for many years. I'm an excellent breather, and I used abdominal breathing to stabilize my system because I was definitely on my way out. In fact, I saw a picture in my mind of myself leaving, which is an interesting story in and of itself. I saw myself leaving, just going out into the cosmos. And then suddenly I was sitting there in a wheelchair without any legs. My legs had been run over and crushed, and I knew it. And so I'm in this wheelchair, and I'm strapped in with a strap around my chest that's holding me into the wheelchair, and I'm meeting with patients. And I hear a voice saying, "You can still make a contribution." And when I heard that voice, I started to choke up with tears, and I sort of pulled myself back from out in the cosmos. That's the only way I can describe it, sort of pulling myself back on a long cord. And then I opened up my eyes and I said to the group that was standing above me as I was laying there on the road, I said, "Get a helicopter fast. I've got to get out of here." And they did. They got a helicopter, and I was flown to an emergency room where they attempted to amputate both of my legs. And I got into a heated argument with the physician, first pointing out that I could move my toes, and he said that, well, yes, that is indicative of the fact that your nerves are still working, but you could be bleeding out. You were run over by a Winnebago. You could be bleeding out. And I said, hey, by the time that fellow ran me over and I laid on the highway, and then the helicopter came, and then the helicopter brought me to you, and then I come in here, I said, if I was bleeding out, I'd be long dead by now. Let's take a look inside. So he went into my legs with an angiogram, came out with a look on his face, and he said, this is remarkable. He said, your vascular system is totally intact. You're not leaking anywhere. And I said, well, if my nerves are working and my vascular system is working, we've got surgery to do on the bones. Let's get with it. Huh. And he operated for 15 and a half hours, that first surgery. And I was told that I would be, of course, in a wheelchair for the rest of my life after I talked him into not amputating the legs. And I said to him, when he said, you'll be in a wheelchair the rest of your life, I said, I'm going to finish a triathlon within 2 years. And I did. I did the San Francisco Triathlon, which is a swim in the bay, a bike ride, and a run. I did the run with special crutches, but I did finish the 10-mile run. So that's the story of that overcoming that adversity or trauma and making the best of it, which I have done.
I'd heard parts of that story, but there were details that I still hadn't heard, and especially that part about the voice saying you can still make a contribution. I think that turned out to be an understatement. And at this point, I guess you were already practicing clinical psychology. Had you already begun the treatment process that you started at Wilbur? Because this is again, just for a little bit of background, Richard had a treatment facility out of a hot springs in Colusa County, Wilbur Hot Springs. People in Northern California know it. It's a special place, and the waters there have these kind of healing qualities that makes it possible to detoxify, whether it's people with alcohol addictions, opiates, cocaine, to detoxify them without any drugs. And you had thousands of people go through your addiction program, not all of them at Wilbur Hot Springs, but using the methods of healing hot waters as part of the treatment. So were you already practicing clinical psychology at this time when the Winnebago ran you over?
Oh, yes, I had been practicing for 25 years already. Yeah, I was past 50 when the accident happened, Charlie. And the Coke Enders Alcohol and Drug Program, which I started, it used the facility at Wilbur Hot Springs for the detoxification. Prior to my program, detox took place in hospitals around the United States, and I created what's called a social model for detoxification, which is outside of a hospital, but in a special setting. And we use the wonderful medicinal waters of Wilbur Hot Springs as part of the detox. I'm very happy to be able to report that of the first 1,500 patients that I detoxed at Wilbur Hot Springs, not one of them required to be flown out in a helicopter and taken to a hospital. We took care of all 1,500 of them right there at the hot springs. And these were people who came to us with profound dependence upon heroin, cocaine, and alcohol. Those were their three primaries. Of course, they all used other things as well, but the three primaries were alcohol, cocaine, and heroin.
And this was during the 80s?
This was from about 1980 to 1990. I ran that program for 10 years, published the results, and it was the first what might be called holistic health chemical dependence program in the country. I taught them about nutrition, which was unheard of for chemically dependent people. I taught them about meditation, although I called it mind clearing. I taught them yoga, though we called it stretching. We taught them about nutrition by calling it high quality fuel intake. So we used language that the people who came to us could relate to and understand. This was not a group that would understand coming for treatment and doing yoga. Yoga was something you did with a loincloth in the Himalayas or at some hippie retreat. But stretching was a good thing, and they all loved to stretch. The other thing that we taught them was the value to health and well-being emotionally and physically of aerobic conditioning. All of my patients learned how to do aerobic conditioning. And I myself had been was during that period a marathon runner. By the way, I taught myself to be a marathon runner as a result of the Coke Enders Alcohol and Drug Program, because I felt like I had to see if it was possible for a couch potato to get off the couch, namely me, a couch potato and a bookworm, to get off the couch and do something, extremely physical. And I did it, accomplished it, and it was actually because I became a marathon runner that I survived. Partly that I survived being run over by the Winnebago, because I had run 3 marathons that year, and the muscles in my legs were very powerful, and they protected me.
Yeah, and it's funny to fast forward from the 80s to the present, where now it's pretty much universally acknowledged that physical fitness is for everyone. It used to be this sort of niche subculture, and then things like yoga went from a fringe, as you say, sort of Himalayan exotic activity to something that you find on every main street in America. And you used a term a couple minutes ago in the context of a disorder, but psychophysical. This idea, you're one of the pioneers of this concept of psychophysical fitness, where it's not just the body, but there's a mind-body component. Talk more about that.
It's more than a mind-body component. It's actually, as hard as it is for us to grasp the notion, the mind and body are one. There is no division. You can't separate them. You can't go in there with any kind of tool and take the mind outside the body and have it function. and vice versa. So we are a oneness, and because of various reasons, including philosophers such as Descartes, saying, I think, therefore I am, so as soon as I think, therefore I am, it's almost like the thinking is the amness of being. But that isn't the case. Being is the amness of being. We think, act, feel, it's all one big package, all communicating with all parts all the time. All communicating with all parts all the time. You can take a hair out of your head and touch the bottom of your foot, and you will feel it. Just like a 2,500-pound horse can have a fly land on its butt, and it feels it. And look at the size of the fly in relationship to the horse, but it feels it because we have optimum sensing, and all parts of us feel everything. It's important for everybody, for all of us to understand there is no such thing as feeling something in a certain part of us, but not in the rest. This issue of what we're going through now with this pandemic, with the novel COVID-19 virus, is a teacher, because you don't get this thing in your throat. You don't get this thing in your lungs. You don't get this in your nose. You get it, period. Your whole system gets it. You can't wall it off. It's not like cutting your finger and you think you can put a bandage on your finger and that's the end of it. Well, it is and it isn't. But your toes know that your finger got cut, and so does your pancreas, because it was an invasion of the entire system when you took the slice. And the same thing is true from the psychology to the body. That which we feel psychologically, of course, the entire system feels. If we're unhappy psychologically, every cell in our system is aware that part of us is feeling unhappy, and it's affecting every cell in our system.
Yeah, that unity of mind and body cuts both ways. When we're feeling good, we can feel it throughout our entire bodies, but when we're feeling bad, we might want to kind of cleave off the mind from the body and try to deal with them in isolation. And as a psychologist, you recognized early on that exercise and physical mobility, stretching, nutrition, these things all had an influence on your clients' sense of well-being. In the fitness world, I wonder to what extent the inverse has been realized, that, say, a personal trainer needs to deal with the emotional and psychological baggage that their clients bring with them.
Well, in the best of all possible worlds, they would, except that they're not trained to do that. Very often I see in the gyms, the physical trainers do a lot of talking, but most often it sounds like a bunch of gossip in the neighborhood rather than the internal state of the person as they're doing the work. Very few physical trainers that I've listened to, maybe it's just because of where I've been, but very few of them are doing things like using visual imagery of watching the inside of the arm with the mind's inner television set as the arm is going up and down with a particular weight. And furthermore, I think it's a major error to allow people to talk, or for the trainers to talk to people while they're working out. When a person is working out, you can give them a little direction, but while they're doing their workout, they should be focusing with their eyes closed on what's going on inside, sensing every little feeling, every little activity, always making adjustments, always knowing whether to go faster or slower, or add a weight or don't add a weight, or move this way or don't move this way. That way you can prevent injuries, but also maximize the workout by having the mind be tuned into the physical, so that you have them working as a coordinated package rather than working out with the weights and thinking about a movie you just watched.
What did that journey look like for you, going from the operating table to within 2 years completing a triathlon? You know, obviously you need to have the belief that you can recover in order for it to happen, but at the level of your physical therapy and your workout regimen building up to that, how did the psyche play into your recovery?
I set my course while I was in intensive care. I knew that I had to keep moving. I also knew that both my legs were encased in some kind of concrete cast and I couldn't move. So I had to figure out a way to do some kind of motion, and I started doing it immediately in intensive care, which was motion with my arms. As soon as I was able to get out of intensive care and into a regular room, I got them to get me into a wheelchair, and I started doing laps around the hospital inside. They wouldn't let me out. And I kept doing laps to work on my upper body because I couldn't work on of course, my lower body. Eventually, after 6 months in the wheelchair, I took my first step. When I took my first step, by the way, I actually cried. It was such an emotional experience because I realized, because they told me I'd never walk again. See, all this negative stuff. First, you're going to be in a wheelchair the rest of your life. Then you're never going to walk again. And if you do, you're going to need a walker, all that kind of stuff, negative stuff. So once I took a first step, I knew if I could take one step, one step forward, I could take more. And I cried. And from then on, I just kept taking more steps and more steps and more steps. And I got crutches, very special, very interesting crutches. And I continued my physical regimen. I ran my first race with the crutches. And then eventually I was able to get up onto a bicycle. And then I got into the swimming pool. And I just I kept moving. The name of the game for physical exercise and to keep this temple that holds ourselves together in a material way, to keep it functioning, it needs to be exercised. That's just how it is, whether it's a big dog or a person. It wants motion. It wants motion. Motion keeps it active and it keeps things moving, keeps it healthy, and most of all, keeps the oxygen flowing. And oxygen is our life force, it's our food, and it's also our best bacteria killer. Oxygen travels through the body scavenging for stuff that it can eradicate.
And this is certainly relevant right now for people who are looking for, immune strengthening uh, ways to avoid infection, and the cardiovascular system, as you're saying, is more than just the heart. It's all of the blood vessels and muscles that work together to keep the blood circulating. So these sort of small steps, and even if you can't move your legs, you're still giving them that juice and helping them heal by working the upper body. I also think about how the hormones are influenced by exercise, and even if we're only working out our legs, since those are such big muscles, the hormonal response can lead to growth in other parts of the body. So, a bodybuilder who wants to get a bigger upper body doesn't just do arms; they also work on the legs, and again, it's that idea of a unified whole that can't just be compartmentalized. What books or
let me just tag on to
please.
something you said there, Charlie. I want to just point out that during those 6 months I was in the wheelchair, I had a machine that I slept with that moved my legs up and down. So the machine, you put your leg into it flat, and then the machine bends up and lays flat, bends up and lays flat. So all night long, as I was sleeping I learned to sleep on my back. The machine would move my knee up, flattened, And I did that 8 hours a night, 4 hours on each leg. I kept
Mm.
that machine going. That was very, because I couldn't move my legs. But I had a way, they cut the casts in such a way that I could take the top of the cast off and then the leg would bend. And then I would strap the top back on after the exercise. If you can picture that. But the reason I'm telling that is because whatever you can do, if you're disabled or debilitated in some way or housebound, to keep moving in some way, that is so powerful for the immune system. What I'm doing personally during this pandemic, Charlie, is I've doubled my aerobic time because I'm in the vulnerable category because of my age, or at least I'm supposedly in the vulnerable category because of my age. You can't tell with an individual case whether you're vulnerable or not based on normative statistics, of course. But anyway, I've doubled it. So now we go out for 2 hours for our aerobic instead of one. And as a way of building up immunity in case we are exposed.
It's inspirational, or at least kind of motivational for me, you know, seeing you as healthy and active as you are into your golden years. And I think as someone in kind of the fitness world who's looking at what's the future of fitness, you can look at the statistics about obesity and diabetes and get a little bit pessimistic that, you know, how is this going to be reversed, and what's even causing it? What's the root cause? And I'm remembering a conversation that we had years ago. We were driving up in Mendocino, where you live, and we were talking about someone who was having trouble with losing weight, and they were exercising, but there seemed to be an issue beneath the purely physical of, well, actually, let me frame it this way, because you asked me what I thought was the cause of the obesity epidemic, and I gave a kind of long and rambling answer about certain kinds of food and, you know, this macronutrient or that macronutrient, and you replied very simply and kind of soberly. I remember it stuck with me, that you think that the reason has more to do with a loss of hope, that people have lost hope in some dimension, and that this is where they're unable to take care of themselves in the way that we're meant to. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, or do you still think that's the case?
I still think that's the case, Charlie, and I appreciate the fact that you remember it. I believe that the socioeconomic stratification in this country and around the world, but we'll focus on our country. I believe the socioeconomic stratification is strangling the lifeblood out of the country. The income inequality is the worst it's ever been, or the most severe it's ever been in the history of our country. The people at the very top, perhaps inadvertently, I'm not attributing motivation, they're sucking the lifeblood out of the country by accumulating enormous amounts of the country's assets. They have accumulated so much that the other 90%, if you want to go 90-10, or 99 and 1, if you want to go that way, or 99.9 and 0.1, if you want to go that way, is a strangulation process. And the people at the lower income levels, the people at least in the bottom 50% or more, are strangling, they're suffocating. We have one family in this country whose assets are the same as the lower 50% of the entire country combined. 165 million people. One family. The reason I say it may be inadvertent is because inherent in the capitalist system, which is the best system that's ever been devised so far, hopefully will do better, much better, because this one is not working, but it's the best we have. This system is destined to the money to go to the top. And if anybody listening Wants to prove this? Get together with some friends and play Monopoly for 3 days. Everybody remember what happens when you play Monopoly for 3 days? One or two people end up with all the money on the board. You remember that, Charlie?
That's how the game ends. Otherwise, it just goes on and
Oh,
on.
right. And the reason they get all the money is not because they're better or they're luckier with dice. It's because it's built into the system that if you own certain things, you're going to win all the money. And the same is true on our planet. Once certain families or people own certain things, they're going to get all the money on the planet. And everybody else is going to suffocate. And we need to do something about that. But back to your question, when you have so many people who are way down, people who during this pandemic have to line up in their cars to go for food because they don't have any money in the bank. When they lost their jobs, they have zero. They might have had 3 weeks of burn money in the bank at most. And 3 weeks run out, the unemployment didn't come. They have to line up for food when you have millions of people living under those conditions even before the pandemic, way before. They know in their hearts and minds that they're living in this situation where if their refrigerator breaks, they don't have money for a refrigerator. Those people living in those conditions for a period of time start to give up hope that it will ever change, that their children will ever get a good education, that they will ever get decent health care. They give up hope. And when they give up hope, they are subject to whatever comes down the pike to give them immediate relief, whether it be OxyContin, which is devastating our middle class, whether it be heroin or cocaine for the lower classes and some of the upper, whether it be alcohol, which is across the country, or whether it be our number one soporific, food. Food, the easiest drug to get, the cheapest drug to get. Cheap food. And what do they do in their suffocation and then their desire for a mini vacation from the hell that they're living, worried about their kids? They eat. And so now, Charlie, in the year 2020, 72% of the United States are obese or overweight, and all of those people are subject to this COVID pandemic because of this underlying condition. And all of these people who are obese or overweight are subject to cardiovascular disease and diabetes.
It's a judgment of sorts on our country in a way, the rates of infection, and it doesn't come down to any individual or group. It is more systemic, as you're saying, and it goes both ways, where the hopelessness feeds into the health problems, and then the health problems contribute to decline in productivity or the inability to go out and seek a job and kind of put your best foot forward in life. So I think that the chicken and egg problem remains, but in our world, we have the ability to kind of help people in at least some capacity, whether that's focusing on the psychological, or as you do, taking a holistic view. And I come more from the health and fitness, but also taking the sort of movement camp in my work. But I also try to take a holistic view. And there are some tools that we have at our disposal for getting people out of the vicious cycle. I was going to ask before about what kinds of writing, or maybe even in this day and age, if there's a YouTube video that you would point people to who are, let's say, personal trainers who have no idea how to deal with their clients' psychological, emotional, or even sort of financial insecurity. Are there resources that trainers can use to empower people to start to climb out of this vicious cycle?
It's a good question, Charlie. The The physical trainers that I know and respect are always in school. That's what I can tell you. I can think of one offhand in Marin, George Atashkarian. I've known him for years. He keeps taking courses. He's always taking classes to upgrade his skills. He's a master trainer. He's always taking more courses. I think that's the thing that I most recommend. Keep learning, keep taking classes. Don't take the position that because you're good at what you do, you know it all. There's more to learn. And of course, always use your own self as your guide. What are your own habits? How healthy is your nutritional plan? How good is your exercise plan? How good is your mental health plan? What do you do to brush your mental health teeth? Look at yourself and what you're doing and take classes. That's what I recommend.
Sounds like good advice. I want to pivot a little bit to the question of culture and values, because the working hypothesis that I've been exploring in this series of conversations is that people who have a clear set of values, who know why they do what they do, are more likely to attract the kinds of clients that they'll be most successful working with, and that it's a better business strategy than, say, going after some particular demographic, this age group, or people of this kind of net worth, or something like that. The Wilbur model is interesting because it's a community, it's a global community of people that come back to Wilbur and keep coming back, and then word of mouth gets around, and so people who would enjoy the Wilbur experience, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what the Wilbur experience is, who end up there kind of know what they're getting into before they arrive. How do you think that what are the values of Wilbur? What is the Wilbur experience, and how has that led to a successful community that's also been able to stay financially afloat through the thick and thin of it?
Well, what I did at Wilbur Hot Springs was develop what I call a health sanctuary. A sanctuary is an ultimately safe place that gives sanctuary. Wilbur is an ultimately safe place to give sanctuary to our health and well-being. And that's why people come there. So foundationally, safety is first, and cleanliness, and respect, and kindness. Those are the four foundational words with Wilbur: safety, cleanliness, respect, and kindness. You have to have all four of those. And with those four, people come, some with illness that they want to heal, others because they want to do preventive maintenance. Some come to a health sanctuary for a vision quest. They want to spend some time inside their own psyche and look for themselves and where they are at the present time. Where am I in my life? What do I believe in? What do I want to make happen with the time that I have left? It's a place to ask those kind of questions, and it's a place to meet with like-minded people who also are asking the big questions, and sometimes intellectual questions, such as, what might we replace capitalism with? What could we create that would lead to more equality, income-wise, around the planet, so that we could reduce fear and increase harmony and grace? In Denmark, considered the happiest people on the planet, who answered the question of how well do you feel you're represented in government, they're close to 100% of their people feel they're represented in government. And part of a great deal of what their happiness is about is they're a people who have figured out how to take care of everyone from cradle to grave. So if you're born, you know you will have what you need to survive from that cradle to your grave. You will always have shelter, food, warmth, and clothing. You have what it takes to survive: shelter, food, warmth, clothing. They also get education and health care. Everyone. They have eliminated the fear factor. In our country, we have the opposite. People in vast numbers are uncertain about whether they'll have enough food, whether they'll have their shelter. If they lose their job, will they be thrown out in the street with their 3 kids or 2 kids or even single? In that country, nobody gets thrown out in the street. Everybody has heat in their home. In our country, you could freeze in your own home if you can't pay for the bill for heat. These are the things we need to be looking at, because these things are basic. And because of what we said earlier in the talk, the mind, body, are one, our psyches are affected when we're afraid that we won't have food on the table for ourselves or our children. And we walk with that fear every moment of our lives. You cannot underestimate the amount of fear that we are perpetrating on the American culture. And now, with a pandemic, that fear is magnified. It is being magnified with a drum, a major drum beat. Every single moment a person turns on the television, they will see very soon, if not immediately, how many people died that day. That is the news of the day. Can you imagine what that is doing to us? Can you imagine saying to somebody, by the way, we're going to create a situation where a year from now, when you turn on your TV, every day for 3 months, you're going to see the number of people dying around you. What do you think is going to happen when we do that to you?
Right. It's the drip, drip, drip. And that chronic stress definitely accumulates in the body.
In the body and the mind. Chronic stress. Not only that, your neighbor is now a danger. Keep away. Keep away. Your neighbor could poison you. People walk on the trail where I walk and where I run. They're out in the open. The wind's going 10 miles an hour. There's no way you're going to infect each other unless you stop and sneeze on a person. But people, they stand back when I drive by in my trike. They move to the side. People are afraid of each other. They're already afraid because of the socioeconomic inequality and their fear of not having the food, the shelter, the warmth, the health care, the education that they need. They're already afraid of that. And now they're afraid that there's some mysterious thing is going to come and kill them.
It's a perfect storm for something. Well, we'll see what that turns out to be. But the mind, body, health, and then the politics, which was the name of your radio show, Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, are all linked, and there's no way to separate them.
Yes, I'm going to get in a quick commercial here. I mean, just
Please.
In case somebody connected to the American Psychological Association is listening. I would like to see a task force of psychotherapists in every county in the United States. I think there are 3,420 counties. Every county should have a task force of psychotherapists who are making therapists available to the public online, virtually, without fee, so that every human being in the United States has access to a psychological therapist to talk about what they're going through in this pandemic.
It would be an interesting experiment, and it's the kind of thing that could turn what's been an overwhelming negative in a lot of ways into a bit of a positive if the people who otherwise wouldn't have had access to that end up getting it as a result. And I do think that this provides an opportunity for people to reset in more areas than just that. You know, we can look at the food supply and how the fragility of our meat packing plants being clustered in a few multinational corporations and just a few thousand plants across the country. Now there's an act to decentralize that and allow for smaller farms to distribute within state boundaries. So there are, I think, opportunities, and this is where I'm hopeful that the world of physical fitness trainers can start to see themselves as belonging to a greater cause than just helping their clients, you know, lose a few pounds or get the beach body. What do you have?
How long are we going? Do we have a little time left, Charlie?
Just about 5-10 minutes was the plan, but
because there's a topic I wanted to talk about for a
yeah,
moment.
I'm not time constrained, but if you need to go, I want to be mindful of that. So
yeah, I don't know how
floor.
long. I don't know how long your listeners are capable of listening to something so long either. So
believe it or not, people have a long attention span for quality conversation. So take the floor.
Okay, I want to talk about sex, because sex is an under talked about topic, and it's a wonderful add-on to healthy living. For those of us who are fortunate enough to have someone that we can have sexual encounters with, particularly during this pandemic, I want to remind you that sex, it's a funny thing to say this, it sounds almost silly to remind someone that sex is a wonderful thing, but I feel the necessity to do it because it's so underplayed in certain ways in our culture and overplayed in other ways in our culture. It's overplayed in ways that demean sex and that make it ridiculous, and there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy about it in our culture, of course. Huge amount of hypocrisy. But at the bottom line, sex is something that we are gifted. It just turns out that came with the package. If you do certain things, physical and emotional, with another human being, we call it sexual excitation. That's our nomenclature for it. But what we know is that if you touch another person and talk to another person in certain ways, we get very excited. It feels good like no other feeling in the world. And furthermore, we can make it as active as or passive as we want. Sex can actually be very active exercise, which is part of an exercise program. And don't forget that. Very important to know. And so I'm bringing this up because I think we need the reminder, particularly during times of fear, that sex is a wonderful activity to engage in, because fear reduces sexual drive. Fear is a distraction from sex. Men have an issue with their penis having to do with how it functions, because it has to function in a certain way in order to insert itself into another person. And fear decreases that erectile functioning, and we have to deal with it. And I'm here to support you if you're dealing with this and you're not in the mood because of the pandemic, or you're not in the mood because you're afraid of losing your job, or you're not in the mood for add on any one of the other stressors. All those things do decrease libido and sex drive. And what I'm advocating is for us to look at that together as a culture and overcome it. Overcome it in the name of good health and in the name of giving ourselves some free. It's really basically sex with your partner is free. Sex with yourself is free. Sex with yourself is free. I remember when I was doing my series on sexuality, human sexuality, on Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, one of the experts says, remember, if you don't know how to sexually gratify yourself, how would you expect somebody else to know how to do it? They're playing multiple choice. So sex with self counts in the world of human sexuality, as well as sex with others. Both do count, and both need to be encouraged and reminded, particularly during a pandemic or in other times of great stress in our lives. We just got to remember that connection. We're being stressed. Our sex life's going to be decreased, turned down. We've got to do something to turn it around and go the opposite way so that we can use this healing modality to heal ourselves. And sexual activity is definitely healing. No two ways about it.
These are the public service announcements that we used to get, those of us who listen to the Mind, Body, Health, and Politics radio program, which I lament that it's no longer on the air. Although if you ever wanted some help in rebooting it as a podcast, I'd be happy to give you some of the tools to do that, because I think that your voice is one of the most unabashed in talking about difficult subjects, and you always have guests that provoke thought, and this area of sex and sexuality is one that, you're right, it's treated very shallowly and immaturely by the majority of media. I'm thinking a little bit, as you're talking about the work of Moshe Feldenkrais, who wrote a book called The Potent Self, where he does deal with this topic a little bit of sexual dysfunction and the roots of it being largely psychological, and how we can start to address it by more comfortably inhabiting our bodies. And I do think that human sexuality as a positive value needs to be recovered and in a sense kind of cleansed of all of the shame and things and hypocrisy that it's been treated with. What would you say is your number one piece of advice for people on lockdown who are struggling to stay physically active? And this deals with the question of, I guess I'll kind of lead you in the direction that I want to go based on the subject of the podcast, which is the values. How can we imbue our exercise with a greater sense of meaning? Maybe sex is one good example because it has the other purpose of it. You know, it feels good. The runner's high also feels good, but not everyone is inclined to go running. So how can we kind of integrate the reason why into our physical activity? Any ideas on that?
If you believe in science, science is telling us that exercise facilitates health. If you believe in personal experience, exercise enough until you get the experience of what it feels like, and then decide for yourself if that feeling is worth getting again and again. If you want to just go with the science and believe that exercise is healthy, then set a schedule. That's the only way to do it. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 5 days a week, whatever it is, you put down a specific time. That is your time. That is the only thing you do during that time. I get up, if 9 o'clock is my time, at 9 o'clock, I just start doing it, period. I don't think about whether I'm going to do it. I don't debate it. I don't allow conflict in my mind. I don't look for drops of rain on the window so I don't have to go out. I don't look at that I don't have the right equipment. I start exercising at 9 o'clock because that's my commitment. And if it's Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Wednesday at 9, I'm there. Friday at 9, I'm there. And that's just it. Period. End of sentence. No excuses. No nonsense. That's my time to do that. If you believe in science and want to cut yourself a path to doing it, that is a way to do it. You set your time and you do it, period. And you just keep sitting there at 9 o'clock until you get yourself doing it. And if you don't do anything until 9:50, then you do it for the last 10 minutes. But you keep designating that hour every single Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever your schedule is, until eventually you start doing it. When I got out of bed and started doing that training after I was injured, I couldn't walk 2 feet. But eventually it was 20 feet, and eventually it was 20 yards, and eventually it was 200 yards, and eventually it was miles, and then eventually it was 26 miles. But it was in little tiny steps. but you have to say, I'm going to be there, and no excuses. And you can't exercise, quote, later in the day. There's no such a thing as exercising later in the day. You have to exercise at the time you've selected to exercise, because that's your time. You do later in the day, it'll never come. There'll always be 4 other things that are more important. I'm sure of that. I've done it. I've used every excuse in the world not to exercise, including 3 drops of rain on the window.
Excellent. The consistency and sort of small steps. And one other thing to add in terms of both the science and my personal experience is that exercise is an excellent antidepressant, and it can actually be more effective. I'm thinking of your series of interviews with Robert Whitaker, the journalist who exposed some of the pharmaceutical industry's failures relative to the easier, well, not necessarily easier if you just want to take a pill and hope the problem goes away. But talk a little bit in the last couple of minutes here just about the research that Robert Whitaker did into the efficacy of exercise compared with the SSRIs, the antidepressants.
Well, Robert Whitaker wrote a great book, and everybody could take a look at this book called Anatomy of an Epidemic. And the epidemic is the epidemic of prescription medicines being perpetrated on the public, supposedly to change their moods for the better. And what Whitaker demonstrated is there was a belief system in psychiatry, that people who had various emotional and mental issues had brain chemistry that was different than the rest of ours. And if you gave them pills, you could get their brain chemistry back to normal. It turns out to be just the opposite. People with these various illnesses have the same brain chemistry as the rest of us. And when you give them those pills, you're messing with their brain chemistry and causing all kinds of trouble. That's basically what his book is about. And if you want more on that, Duke University did the most important research comparing exercise to the pharmaceutical non-depressants that's ever been done. They then did a 3-year follow-up study. Consumer Reports did a similar report on this research, but Duke University is the classical study. And what that exercise not only leaves prescription antidepressants in the dust, the antidepressants, when taken with exercise, reduce the positive effects of the exercise. These are dangerous drugs. It's hard for Americans to wrap their heads around the fact that there are companies who will sell dangerous drugs as if they're not dangerous and go to sleep at night and have families and be regular people. But there are people like that. It's just how life is. Just like there were 3 top people of the 3 top cigarette companies in the United States who stood up before Congress, raised their right hands, and swore that cigarette smoking was not addictive. Right in front of the world, they swore, and they are selling cigarettes to this day, killing 365,000 people every single year. That's 1,000 people a day. Can you imagine what would happen if we put the number of people dying from cigarette smoking on the television every day? Every day, 1,000. Every day, 1,000. Every day, 1,000. We don't do that, but we should. Well, anyway, that's your answer about Robert Whitaker. Anatomy of an Epidemic, a must-read book. Great researcher, world famous researcher.
And that might be the one for personal trainers to look into if they want to take one book or thinker away. Robert Whitaker would be a great one. And you can also find the interviews that Richard did. The MindBody Health and Politics podcast is, I think, still available up on SoundCloud. It's
my website is still up. MindBody Health and Politics. All my interviews are on the website.
Excellent. Well, it would be that much easier if you ever decide to pick it back up again. And it's great talking with you and seeing you in top form. There's, I think that you've got your beard is a little bit grayer than the last time I saw you, but you look younger than the day I met you 6 or 7 years ago. And so it's wonderful to reconnect.
It's wonderful to reconnect with you, Charlie. I love your new beard. The reason my beard is grayer is because I did not have a beard. I have a beard, so do you. They're a lot of fun. I'm going to call you on the phone and accept your offer to help me with that podcast. And thank you so much for today's interview. It was real fun.
Hey there, cultured person. If you liked this episode, you'll love our guide, Strong Values, 6 Questions for Struggling Fitness Professionals. Get it for free when you sign up for our email list. You'll also get access to our full library of interviews, plus weekly links delivered to your inbox, featuring the best fitness-related articles from around the web.